Airline staff laugh at a black woman's accent. Minutes later, they're fired by their new CEO. A calm, elegant woman steps onto a plane, expecting nothing more than a quiet journey. But the staff, they mock her, dismiss her, and underestimate her, all because of her accent. What they don't realize is that this passenger holds the power to change everything. What happens next will leave you speechless. The morning was quiet, save for the distant roar of jet engines. Fiona Williams stood at the curb of the bustling airport, adjusting the strap of her leather handbag as her driver retrieved her luggage from the car's trunk. The scarf draped over her shoulders, a delicate weave of emerald green and gold, fluttered slightly in the soft breeze. She paused for a moment, letting her gaze sweep over the terminal's towering glass facade. Her presence was understated but commanding. Fiona was no stranger to airports, having traveled extensively for both work and leisure, yet today felt different. This trip marked the beginning of something new, a role she had fought hard to earn, and one that came with a responsibility she took deeply to heart. The driver handed her a sleek black suitcase, and Fiona thanked him with a polite nod. "Have a good day," she said, her voice warm yet formal, her African accent giving her words a melodic quality. She stepped through the sliding doors, leaving behind the controlled hum of the outside world and stepping into the chaos of the terminal. Inside, the airport was alive with energy. Travelers hurriedly checked their phones, families huddled together with their luggage, and announcements echoed overhead. Fiona moved through the crowd with ease, her posture upright, her movements deliberate. She exuded a quiet confidence, the kind that turned heads without trying. Her eyes scanned the signs above for the priority check-in line, her polished heels clicking softly against the polished floor. She joined the queue, placing her suitcase beside her and reaching into her handbag for her passport and ticket. Ahead of her, the priority line moved quickly, attended by two gate agents stationed behind a sleek counter. Fiona noticed them immediately. One, a young blonde woman with sharp features, tapped away on her phone, barely acknowledging the passengers in front of her. The other, a man with a loose tie and an air of boredom, leaned on the counter, chatting casually with his colleague. Fiona stepped forward as the line advanced, her turn approaching. She could feel their gazes shift toward her, their casual conversation pausing as she drew closer. Next, the blonde agent called out, her tone clipped. Fiona approached the counter, her ticket and passport in hand. "Good morning," Fiona said, offering her documents with a small smile. The blonde agent, whose name tag read Sarah, barely glanced at Fiona before taking the ticket. "Morning," she muttered, her voice devoid of any warmth. She scanned the ticket, and the faintest trace of a smirk crossed her face. "First class, huh?" Sarah said, holding up the ticket as if inspecting it for authenticity. She exchanged a glance with her colleague, Frank, who arched an eyebrow in amusement. "Yes, that is correct," Fiona replied, her voice calm and measured. Sarah handed the ticket back, but didn't meet Fiona's eyes. "I'm going to need to see your ID," she said, her smirk lingering. "Just routine." Fiona obliged without hesitation, retrieving her passport and placing it on the counter. Sarah opened it and scanned the page, her eyes lingering a little too long on the details. "Huh," Sarah murmured under her breath. "Didn't expect that." Frank leaned closer, pretending to examine the passport over Sarah's shoulder. "Looks legit," he said in a mock-serious tone, his voice carrying just enough for Fiona to hear. Fiona caught the insinuation but said nothing. Her years of experience had taught her to recognize the quiet digs, the subtle undermining that people like this often wielded. Instead of reacting, she maintained her composure, letting the silence stretch uncomfortably for Sarah and Frank. Sarah finally handed the passport back, her professional demeanor poorly masking her condescension. "You're all set," she said, waving a hand toward security. "Enjoy your flight." Fiona nodded politely. "Thank you." She took her belongings and walked away with steady, deliberate steps, the faint sound of laughter trailing behind her. The security line was long, but Fiona's priority status allowed her to bypass most of the wait. Still, as she approached the checkpoint, a security guard stepped forward and gestured for her to step aside. "Random screening," the guard said, his tone brusque but not hostile. Fiona complied without hesitation, setting her handbag and suitcase on the inspection table. She removed her scarf and watch, as instructed, placing them in a plastic tray. The guard rifled through her belongings with an air of disinterest, pausing momentarily at a leather-bound notebook tucked into her bag. "Looks fancy," he remarked, flipping it open to reveal neat handwriting and intricate designs on the pages. "It's a personal journal," Fiona said evenly. The guard nodded absently and closed the notebook, returning it to her bag. "You're good to go," he said, sliding her belongings down the table. Fiona reassembled herself methodically, draping her scarf back over her shoulders and adjusting her watch. She thanked the guard and moved toward the boarding gate, her stride unhurried but purposeful. As Fiona approached the gate, a young man seated nearby observed her quietly. Kevin, dressed in a simple hoodie and jeans, had been watching her interactions from afar. The dismissive attitudes, the unnecessary scrutiny, his expression hardened as he recalled the smirks and whispers from the gate agents earlier. Kevin was no stranger to discrimination himself. He recognized the subtle signs, the microaggressions that often went unnoticed by others. And while he wasn't sure who this woman was, something about the way she carried herself made him want to speak up. He glanced at his phone, his thumb hovering over the record button. For now, he decided to wait, but the unease in his chest lingered. At the boarding gate, Fiona settled into a chair by the window, her notebook open on her lap. She began to write, her pen gliding across the page in fluid motions. The terminal buzzed around her, but she was lost in her own thoughts. She had been through this many times before, the assumptions, the quiet mockery, the way her presence alone seemed to unsettle some people. But she had learned to let those moments fuel her resolve. They were a reminder of why she had worked so hard to get where she was. As she looked out at the plane waiting on the tarmac, Fiona allowed herself a small, knowing smile. They had no idea who she was or the changes she was about to bring, and that was exactly how she wanted it. The boarding announcement crackled over the loudspeaker, drawing Fiona's attention from the pages of her notebook. The words seemed to echo through the terminal, each syllable punctuating the anticipation of the journey ahead. She closed the notebook carefully, slipping it into her handbag before standing to adjust her scarf. Passengers began gathering their belongings, moving toward the boarding gate with varying degrees of impatience. "First-class passengers, you may now board," came the calm voice of the gate agent. Fiona stepped forward with measured grace, her suitcase gliding silently behind her. As she approached the boarding desk, the same two gate agents from earlier were still stationed there, Sarah and Frank. Their demeanor hadn't changed. They leaned against the counter with casual indifference, though their eyes narrowed slightly as they caught sight of Fiona. Sarah straightened up as Fiona reached the front of the line, her lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, it's you again," Sarah said, her tone feigning politeness but betraying a hint of condescension. She extended her hand for the boarding pass. Fiona offered the ticket with calm composure. "Good evening," she said, her voice steady. Sarah took the ticket and scanned it. The green light flashed on the screen, accompanied by a soft beep. Sarah's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something behind her eyes, irritation perhaps. She handed the ticket back with a slight toss of her wrist. "Enjoy your flight," Sarah said, her voice laced with mock cheerfulness. Fiona met her gaze for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Thank you," she said, taking the ticket and walking past the counter without breaking her stride. Behind her, Sarah turned to Frank, lowering her voice just enough to think she wouldn't be overheard. "Unbelievable," she whispered. "She's probably flying on someone else's points." Frank chuckled, shaking his head. "Or saved up her whole life for this one trip." Neither of them noticed the young man, Kevin, seated nearby. He had been observing the interaction with quiet intensity, his phone discreetly positioned to record. He frowned as he watched Fiona walk away, her posture dignified despite the sneers trailing her. The jet bridge was quiet, save for the hum of the aircraft's engines. Fiona stepped onto the plane and was greeted by a flight attendant stationed at the door. Her name tag read Carol, and her smile seemed well-practiced but devoid of warmth. "Welcome aboard," Carol said, her voice clipped. Her eyes flicked over Fiona's outfit, lingering a beat too long on her scarf, before shifting to the ticket in Fiona's hand. "First class, right this way." She gestured toward the cabin with a sweep of her hand, then turned her attention to the next passenger without another word. Fiona moved down the aisle, her gaze sweeping over the pristine cabin. The first-class section was a world apart from the chaos of the terminal, spacious seats, soft lighting, and an air of exclusivity that seemed to demand hushed voices. She reached her seat, a window position in the second row, and carefully placed her handbag under the seat in front of her. She paused for a moment, taking in her surroundings. The passengers around her were engrossed in their own pre-flight routines, typing on laptops, scrolling through phones, or quietly chatting with companions. Fiona's presence drew a few subtle glances, but no one said anything. A few moments later, Carol appeared in the aisle, a tray of pre-departure drinks balanced on one hand. She stopped at each seat, offering champagne or sparkling water with a rehearsed smile. When she reached Fiona, the smile faltered slightly, replaced by a hint of indifference. "Drink before takeoff?" Carol asked, her tone devoid of the warmth she had extended to the other passengers. "Just water, please," Fiona replied, her voice calm. Carol nodded and handed her a glass, the movement brisk. As Fiona reached for it, Carol let the tray dip slightly, causing a few drops of water to splash onto Fiona's tray table. "Oops," Carol said with a half-smile. "Turbulence already." Fiona didn't react, simply taking the glass and setting it down. She reached for a napkin from the pocket in front of her seat and wiped the spilled water with deliberate care. Carol stood there for a moment, as if expecting a reaction, but when none came, she moved on to the next passenger. From his seat in coach, Kevin had a clear view of the interaction. He frowned, leaning slightly into the aisle to get a better look. Fiona's calm demeanor contrasted sharply with Carol's dismissive attitude, and Kevin felt a pang of frustration. He had seen this kind of treatment before, subtle, calculated, and designed to humiliate without crossing overt lines. Kevin debated intervening but decided against it for the moment. Instead, he opened the Notes app on his phone and began typing, detailing everything he had witnessed so far. His fingers moved quickly, the words flowing with a sense of urgency. He didn't know who Fiona was, but he knew she didn't deserve this. As the plane taxied to the runway, Fiona gazed out the window, her reflection faintly visible against the darkening sky. She thought of the events of the day, the smirks, the whispers, the unnecessary scrutiny, and allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection. She had faced these moments before, the microaggressions that sought to undermine her sense of belonging. Each time, she reminded herself of who she was and what she had achieved. These moments didn't define her, they strengthened her resolve. The engines roared as the plane lifted off the ground, the cabin tilting slightly with the ascent. Fiona closed her eyes briefly, centering herself. There was work to be done, and she was ready. They didn't know it yet, but this flight would change everything, for her and for them. It was only a matter of time. The flight was cruising at a steady altitude, the hum of the engines filling the cabin with a constant, low vibration. Fiona sat in her seat, her hands resting lightly on the edges of the tray table, her posture composed but not rigid. Her water glass sat untouched beside her notebook, which she had opened once again, her pen poised to write. The calm facade she presented was deliberate, a shield that concealed the subtle weight of the morning's encounters. Around her, the other first-class passengers were absorbed in their own worlds. A man in a sharp suit adjusted his cufflinks while glancing through a financial magazine. Across the aisle, a woman in her mid-30s scrolled through her phone, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against the screen. They all seemed oblivious to the quiet drama that had unfolded at the gate and continued to ripple through the actions of the cabin crew. Carol reappeared in the aisle, this time distributing menus for the in-flight meal. Her smile was a polished mask, slightly forced but passable. She moved from passenger to passenger with the same rehearsed line, "Here's the menu for today's service. Let me know if you have any questions." When she reached Fiona's seat, the faintest flicker of discomfort crossed Carol's face. She held out the menu without making eye contact, her movements hurried. "Here you go," she said, already turning to the next passenger before Fiona could respond. Fiona accepted the menu with a quiet, "Thank you," her tone even, though Carol's lack of acknowledgement didn't escape her notice. She unfolded the menu slowly, taking a moment to skim the options. Her movements were measured, deliberate, as if refusing to let the interaction disturb her sense of calm. Further back in the plane, Kevin sat in his cramped coach seat, watching the first-class cabin with quiet intensity. He had chosen a seat near the dividing curtain, giving him a partial view of the spacious rows ahead. From where he sat, he could see Fiona's composed figure and the occasional interactions between her and the flight attendants. Kevin leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. He had taken notes earlier, recording the check-in desk incident and the behavior he had observed so far. Something about Fiona intrigued him, the way she carried herself, the way she responded to disrespect with grace rather than confrontation. It was a strength he both admired and found puzzling. "Why doesn't she say something?" he murmured under his breath, his fingers tapping idly on the edge of his phone. He knew the answer, of course. Speaking up came with risks, especially when the odds were stacked against you. Still, watching it unfold left a bitter taste in his mouth. The meal service began soon after, and Carol returned with a tray for Fiona. Unlike her interactions with the other passengers, Carol placed Fiona's tray down with an audible clink, the utensils rattling slightly. "Enjoy," she said curtly before moving on. Fiona glanced down at the neatly arranged plate in front of her. The presentation was impeccable, a testament to the airline's commitment to luxury, but the delivery had been anything but. She picked up her fork, pausing for a moment as her thoughts wandered. The meal was quiet, almost meditative. Fiona ate slowly, her movements precise, as though savoring each bite, but her mind was elsewhere, replaying the events of the day like a film on loop. Each glance, each whisper, each deliberate slight, it all painted a picture she had seen many times before. Yet, this time felt different. This time, she had the power to act. As the flight attendants began clearing trays, Carol stopped by Fiona's seat again. This time, her tone was laced with thinly veiled impatience. "Finished." Fiona looked up, her gaze steady. "Yes, thank you," she replied, her voice calm. She handed over the tray, her fingers brushing against the cool metal edges. Carol hesitated, as if expecting Fiona to say more, perhaps to complain. When nothing came, Carol forced a tight smile and walked away, muttering under her breath, "Unbelievable." Fiona heard the remark, but chose not to react. She shifted in her seat, reaching for her notebook once again. Her pen moved across the page in smooth, deliberate strokes, the words flowing as if they had been waiting for the right moment to be released. In the coach section, Kevin had seen enough. His frustration bubbled over as he watched Carol's dismissive attitude, the way she seemed to go out of her way to belittle Fiona. He pulled out his phone and began typing a detailed account of everything he had witnessed, this time with even greater precision. The flight attendant's name, her actions, and her tone. He documented it all. Kevin didn't know what he planned to do with the information yet, but he felt compelled to create a record. If no one else was going to stand up for Fiona, at least he could ensure her story didn't go unnoticed. The flight began its descent, the captain's voice breaking through the cabin speakers to announce their arrival. Passengers stirred, gathering their belongings and preparing for the landing. Fiona closed her notebook and placed it carefully in her handbag, her expression serene. As the plane touched down, the cabin filled with the familiar jolts and hums of deceleration. Fiona remained seated, waiting as the other passengers began to disembark. She was in no rush. Patience, she had learned, was often the most powerful tool at her disposal. When the first-class cabin was nearly empty, Fiona rose from her seat, her movements unhurried. She adjusted her scarf, smoothed her jacket, and retrieved her suitcase. As she stepped into the aisle, she felt the weight of Carol's gaze but didn't acknowledge it. "Have a nice day," Carol said, her tone flat, the words ringing hollow. Fiona paused briefly, her back still turned. "You too," she replied softly, her voice carrying just enough weight to leave an impression. As Fiona stepped off the plane and into the bustling terminal, her expression remained unreadable. Behind her, the flight attendants continued their duties, oblivious to the significance of the day's events. But Fiona knew the tide was about to turn, and the reckoning would come, not in anger, but in the form of a quiet, unshakable justice. And as she walked toward the terminal's exit, her resolve only deepened. This was just the beginning. Fiona Williams walked into the terminal, her suitcase gliding effortlessly behind her. The soft murmurs of travelers around her seemed to fade into the background as she focused on the path ahead. She had left behind the cramped confines of the plane, but the memories of the flight lingered: Sarah's smirks, Carol's dismissive tone, the quiet laughter she was meant to overhear. Fiona's face betrayed none of it. Her calm demeanor was a mask she had perfected over years of navigating such encounters. As she approached the exit, she spotted a tall, sharply dressed man holding a sign that read, Fiona Williams, CEO, welcome. His posture was formal, his eyes scanning the crowd with precision. When their eyes met, a smile spread across his face, and he stepped forward, extending his hand. Mrs. Williams, he greeted warmly. Welcome to headquarters. Thank you, Mr. Jones, Fiona replied, shaking his hand with poise. I appreciate you meeting me here. The exchange was polite, professional, but not without weight. Fiona could see the faintest flicker of curiosity in Jones's eyes, a subtle question hanging in the air. How had her journey gone? She had no intention of answering just yet. Mr. Jones guided her through the terminal, their pace measured. Around them, travelers bustled to their destinations, oblivious to the quiet authority Fiona exuded. As they walked, Jones gestured toward a private elevator that would take them to the executive lounge. Everything has been prepared for your arrival, Jones said, his tone crisp but warm. The team is eager to meet you. Fiona nodded, acknowledging his words, but keeping her own brief. Good. I'm eager to meet them as well. Inside the elevator, the polished mirrors reflected their composed figures. Fiona noticed Jones glancing at her reflection, his curiosity no longer as concealed. I trust the flight was comfortable? He ventured carefully, breaking the silence. Fiona met his gaze in the mirror, her expression neutral. Comfortable enough, she replied. Her words were measured, leaving little room for further inquiry. Jones seemed to understand that now was not the time to press for detail. The elevator chimed softly as it reached the lounge, and he stepped aside to let Fiona exit first. The executive lounge was a stark contrast to the bustling terminal below. The space was quiet and opulent, with plush seating, soft lighting, and a panoramic view of the runway. A small group of airline executives was gathered near a long table, their murmured conversations halting the moment Fiona entered the room. Mrs. Williams, one of them, a woman in a tailored gray suit, stepped forward to greet her. Welcome, we're honored to have you here. Thank you, Fiona replied, shaking the woman's hand firmly. I appreciate the warm welcome. She took a seat at the head of the table, her movements deliberate. The executives followed suit, their eyes trained on her, waiting for her to speak. Fiona set her handbag down beside her chair, her hands resting lightly on the table as she surveyed the room. I won't take up too much of your time, Fiona began, her voice steady and clear. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this airline, one that I am deeply committed to leading with integrity, accountability, and respect. The room was silent, the executives nodding as they listened. Fiona allowed a brief pause, letting her words settle before continuing. My goal is to ensure that every employee, from the highest-ranking executive to the newest hire, understands the values this airline stands for. That begins with holding ourselves and each other to the highest standards. She paused again, her gaze sweeping the room. I understand there have been issues in the past, incidents that have gone unaddressed. I intend to change that. The executives exchanged subtle glances, their postures shifting slightly. Fiona's calm, yet commanding tone had set the tone for what was to come. After the meeting, Fiona lingered in the lounge, her thoughts focused on the day's next steps. Mr. Jones approached her cautiously, holding a tablet with a list of scheduled engagements. There's a press introduction later this afternoon, he began, and a private meeting with the board tomorrow morning. Fiona nodded, scanning the schedule briefly before looking up at him. Thank you, Mr. Jones, but there's one more matter I'd like to address today. Jones tilted his head slightly, waiting for her to continue. I need to arrange a meeting with the flight crew from this morning's flight, Fiona said, her tone firm but not unkind, particularly the cabin staff and ground agents. Jones hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. Of course. May I ask if there's a specific concern? Fiona met his gaze directly, her expression unreadable. Let's just call it a review, she said evenly. It's best we start with clarity. As arrangements were made, Fiona took a moment to sit by the window, her gaze fixed on the planes taxiing on the runway below. The rhythmic motion of the aircraft was calming, a quiet contrast to the storm she was about to bring. In her mind, she replayed every moment of her journey, from Sarah's smirk at the check-in counter to Carol's dismissive tone during the flight. She thought of Kevin, the quiet young man whose watchful gaze hadn't escaped her notice. His subtle defiance in the face of injustice had been a small, but meaningful reminder that not everyone was blind to what had unfolded. Fiona's calm exterior belied the fire within. She wasn't angry, anger was fleeting and unproductive. She was determined to ensure that what had happened to her would not happen to anyone else. And as she waited for the meeting to begin, she allowed herself a small, knowing smile. This was the first step in a much larger journey. The reckoning was near, and it would be precise, deliberate, and entirely deserved. The private meeting room was a stark contrast to the opulence of the executive lounge. Its minimalist design, plain white walls, a sleek oval table, and functional chairs, was chosen for its utility rather than comfort. Fiona Williams sat at the head of the table, her posture poised yet unyielding. Her notebook lay closed in front of her, a silent emblem of the meticulous notes she had taken throughout the day. To her left, Mr. Jones sat quietly, his tablet resting in his lap. He glanced at Fiona periodically, unsure of what to expect as they waited. Opposite them, the door remained closed, though the muffled sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. A soft knock interrupted the stillness. Mr. Jones stood, his movements measured, as he opened the door. In walked the airline staff from the morning's flight, Sarah, Frank, and Carol. Their postures were hesitant, their eyes darting between each other and Fiona. Gone were the smirks and air of casual indifference. Now, uncertainty clung to them like a shadow. "Please, take a seat," Fiona said, gesturing toward the chairs opposite her. Her voice was calm, almost disarmingly so. It lacked anger, yet carried an authority that left no room for question. The three staff members sat down, their movements stiff and cautious. Sarah fidgeted with the hem of her uniform jacket, while Frank's hands gripped the armrests of his chair a little too tightly. Carol, usually the most confident among them, avoided eye contact altogether. Fiona allowed a brief moment of silence to hang in the air, the kind that pressed against the room and demanded attention. When she finally spoke, her words were deliberate, each one chosen with care. "I've asked you here to discuss an incident that occurred earlier today," she began, her eyes meeting each of theirs in turn. "An incident that involved a lack of professionalism and a clear violation of this airline's values." Sarah shifted uncomfortably in her seat, glancing at Frank as if searching for some unspoken reassurance. Carol's lips pressed into a thin line, her shoulders tensing. "I assume you know what I'm referring to," Fiona continued. It wasn't a question, it was a statement, and its weight landed squarely on the trio. Fiona nodded subtly to Mr. Jones, who tapped a few keys on his tablet. The screen on the wall behind her lit up, displaying the footage Kevin had recorded at the check-in counter. Every smirk, every whispered insult, and every act of subtle dismissal played back in crisp detail. The silence in the room deepened as the video rolled. Sarah's face flushed red, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Frank's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on a spot just beyond Fiona's shoulder. Carol glanced at the screen, her expression frozen in a mixture of shock and disbelief. When the video ended, Fiona leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped neatly on the table. "This," she said, her voice as steady as before, "is the behavior I witnessed. It is the behavior passengers witnessed, and it is the behavior that now represents this airline." Lisa opened her mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. Fiona raised a hand, silencing her before the words could form. "Let me be clear," Fiona continued. "This is not about a single incident. This is about the culture it represents, a culture that allows individuals like you to believe this behavior is acceptable." Fiona turned her attention to Sarah first, her gaze steady. "You mocked a paying passenger," she said. "You questioned the legitimacy of her ticket and treated her with disdain. Tell me, Sarah, is that the level of service we aspire to provide?" Sarah's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. I didn't mean any harm," she stammered, her voice shaky. "It was just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" Fiona repeated, her tone neutral. "You seemed quite clear in the video." Sarah's shoulders sagged, her eyes dropping to her lap. Next, Fiona shifted her focus to Frank. "And you," she said. "Your role was to assist, yet you joined in the mockery. You found humor in disrespect. Is that the behavior of someone who values their position?" Frank's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. "It wasn't meant to. It wasn't meant to. It wasn't meant to what?" Fiona interrupted, her voice remaining calm, but the sharpness of her words cut through his weak attempt at justification. "It wasn't meant to be overheard. It wasn't meant to matter." Frank fell silent, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the chair. Finally, Fiona addressed Carol. And you, she said. You had multiple opportunities to extend professionalism and respect, yet you chose dismissiveness at every turn. You placed a tray of water down so carelessly, it spilled. You offered condescending remarks instead of service. Is that the standard we should accept from our cabin crew? Carol's jaw tightened, but she didn't respond. Her silence spoke volumes. Fiona straightened, her gaze unwavering. This airline is at a crossroads, she said. We cannot afford to tolerate behavior that undermines our mission and values. Effective immediately, the three of you are placed on unpaid leave, pending a full review of your conduct. Sarah gasped audibly, her hands flying to her mouth. Frank shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Carol's eyes narrowed in defiance. This is unfair, Carol blurted, her voice rising. You're blowing this out of proportion. Fiona raised an eyebrow, her calm demeanor unshaken. Unfair would be allowing this behavior to go unchecked. Unfair would be subjecting another passenger to the same treatment I received. Do you disagree? Carol's defiance faltered, and she slumped back into her chair. Fiona continued, her tone resolute. You will have the opportunity to reflect, to learn, and to change. Whether or not you choose to take that opportunity is up to you. The meeting ended, and Fiona stood, signaling the conversation was over. Sarah, Frank, and Carol left the room, their steps heavy, their expressions ranging from shame to frustration. Mr. Jones lingered behind, his expression thoughtful. That was thorough, he said carefully. It needed to be, Fiona replied. Change doesn't happen without accountability. She walked to the window, gazing out at the planes lined up on the runway. This was only the beginning, but it was a start. Behind her, Mr. Jones stood quietly, sensing the gravity of the moment. For Fiona, this wasn't just about addressing a single flight or a single team. It was about sending a message, one that would ripple through every corner of the airline. Respect wasn't optional, it was mandatory. And under her leadership, it would be the standard. The late afternoon sun filtered through the towering windows of the executive lounge, casting long beams of golden light across the carpeted floor. Fiona Williams stood near the window, her gaze distant as she observed the planes rolling across the tarmac below. Each aircraft carried countless stories, a web of human connections interwoven across the sky. It was a powerful image, and one she had always loved about aviation, the way it connected people and places, the way it could transcend barriers. But today, Fiona's thoughts were not on the beauty of flight. They lingered instead on the meeting that had just concluded. The echoes of Sarah, Frank, and Carol's uneasy voices still fresh in her mind. Their reactions, the denials, the defensiveness, the fleeting glimpses of shame, were all too familiar. She had seen it before, in other places, in other people, and she knew it was a long road to change. Behind her, the soft click of the lounge door announced the arrival of Mr. Jones. He hesitated for a moment before approaching, as though sensing the gravity of her thoughts. When Fiona turned to acknowledge him, he offered a small, understanding smile. Mrs. Williams, he began, his voice quiet. I wanted to commend you on how you handled that meeting. It couldn't have been easy. Fiona returned his smile, though it was tinged with weariness. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Easy or not, it was necessary. He nodded, taking a step closer. If I may ask, do you think they'll take this as an opportunity to change, to reflect? Fiona considered the question carefully, her hands clasped in front of her. Some might, she said slowly. But real change isn't about a single conversation or even a single consequence. It's about consistency. It's about creating an environment where respect is the norm, not the exception. Jones tilted his head, his expression thoughtful. That's a vision I can stand behind. Fiona's smile deepened, a flicker of hope lighting her face. Then let's make it happen. Later that evening, Fiona returned to her office, a spacious corner room on the top floor of the headquarters. The city skyline stretched out before her, a sea of twinkling lights and bustling streets. She sat at her desk, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating the papers scattered across its surface. Her pen hovered over a blank sheet of paper as she crafted the first lines of a memo to the entire airline staff. This wasn't just a message. It was a declaration of intent, a commitment to the values she intended to uphold as their leader. To all staff, today marks the beginning of a new chapter for this airline, one rooted in respect, accountability, and a shared commitment to excellence. We are more than a company. We are a community. Every action we take, every word we speak, reflects not only on ourselves, but on the values we represent. Respect is not just a courtesy, it is a foundation. It is how we treat each other, how we serve our passengers, and how we build trust with the world. As your CEO, I pledge to hold myself and every member of this organization to that standard. Change is never easy, but it is always possible. Together, we will create an airline we can all be proud of. Sincerely, Fiona Williams, Chief Executive Officer. She read the letter over twice, ensuring every word carried the weight of her intent. Satisfied, she signed it with a flourish and handed it to her assistant to distribute company-wide. The following morning, Fiona began her day with a visit to the ground staff team, a group often overlooked but essential to the airline's operations. She walked through the bustling terminal, her presence commanding attention but radiating approachability. The ground staff supervisor, Ms. Green, greeted her warmly. "Mrs. Williams, it's an honor to have you here," she said, her voice tinged with both pride and nervousness. "The honor is mine," Fiona replied, shaking her hand firmly. "I wanted to meet with your team and thank you all personally for the work you do. You are the backbone of this airline, and your contributions do not go unnoticed." As she spoke, Fiona could see the surprise in their faces. It wasn't every day that the CEO walked through the terminal, let alone stopped to acknowledge their work. She spent time speaking with each member, listening to their stories, their challenges, and their ideas for improvement. "Your presence means a lot," Ms. Green said as Fiona prepared to leave. "It reminds us that we're part of something bigger." Fiona placed a hand on her shoulder. "You are, and I will do everything I can to make sure you feel that every day." As Fiona walked back toward her office, she spotted a familiar face in the terminal, Kevin, the young man from her flight. He stood near a coffee kiosk, his phone in hand, his expression one of quiet determination. Fiona approached him, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. When Kevin looked up and saw her, his eyes widened in recognition. "Mrs. Williams," he said, startled. I didn't expect to see you here." Fiona smiled warmly. "And yet, here we are. I wanted to thank you, Kevin. Your actions didn't go unnoticed." Kevin blinked, his surprise giving way to a shy smile. "I just thought someone needed to say something, to do something." "You were right," Fiona said. "It takes courage to stand up when others don't, and that courage is exactly what we need more of." Kevin looked down, his cheeks flushing slightly. "I didn't think it was much." "It was," Fiona said firmly. "And if you're ever interested in a career here, reach out to my office. People like you are what will make this airline better." Kevin nodded, his smile growing. "Thank you, Mrs. Williams. I'll think about it." Fiona gave him a final nod before continuing on her way, her resolve stronger than ever. Change wouldn't happen overnight, but step by step, she was building the foundation for something lasting. Back in her office, Fiona stood by the window once more, watching as another plane lifted off into the sky. The journey to transform the airline would be long and challenging, but it was a journey worth taking. Her mind returned to the words she had written in the memo. Change is never easy, but it is always possible. For Fiona, those words weren't just a promise to her staff, they were a promise to herself. And so, what started as a moment of mockery turned into a powerful lesson. Respect is earned, but dignity, that's something no one can take away. Fiona didn't just hold her ground. She set a new standard, one that will ripple through the airline for years to come. If this story inspired you, made you think, or simply kept you hooked until the end, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Your support helps us share more stories that spark change, challenge perspectives, and leave a lasting impact. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the quietest moments carry the loudest messages. See you in the next story.